Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UAP, UFO news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to cover the Senate UAP hearing that occurred on Tuesday, November the 19th. But first, I'd like to go over a few events that preceded that hearing. Just a week before that Senate UAP hearing, Congress had their second UAP congressional hearing on the 13th. And here's Representative Nancy Mace, who oversaw the hearing with the opening statements.
We will hear testimony today concerning recent revelations about a purportedly secret UAP program whose existence and findings may have been improperly withheld from Congress. But before we get to the witnesses, we're going to have a few more opening statements from our colleagues. And one thing I wanted to add at the end of my closing statement is there is a document that will be entered into the congressional record today. Mr. Tim Burchett from Tennessee has this document, and we just distributed it to every member up here on the dais of this document. But this is going to be the original document from the Pentagon about Immaculate Constellation that Michael Shellenberger delivered to Congress today. So thank you, Mr. Shellenberger, for this information. We are all reading it in real time now, and Mr. Burchett will enter it into the record. But 12 pages about this unacknowledged special access program that your government says does not exist.
So when I saw Nancy Mace open up the congressional hearing by distributing copies of the Immaculate Constellation report, I became pretty excited. It's a report that supposedly shows that the government has programs where they are reverse engineering UAPs and has all sorts of very provocative information. There was also discussion during the congressional hearing about a section in the Immaculate Constellation report where it talks about the pilot sharing a consciousness with the vehicle that it's flying. The subreddit UFOB said during a recent congressional hearing there was discussion of a, quote, shared awareness, end quote, with a UAP. This lines up with the 1996 leaked document, quote, mission assessment of recovered lenticular aerodyne objects, end quote, that explicitly states there is a, quote, symbiotic relationship between operator and operation, end quote. And apparently there's a helmet that pilots wear so that they can link up their consciousness with the vehicle that they're flying. I found this on the subreddit UFO, and it says the congressional hearing referenced encounters with UAP that can result in shared awareness with the craft. The pilot and the craft become one, but without going any further as to avoid the pilot identifying with the target. And the smaller print here on this post says the Immaculate Constellation report was authored by a former intelligence official and was recently entered in the congressional record. Nancy Mace actually entered it into the congressional record. The document includes information from an anonymous intelligence website called Forgotten Languages, which frequently cites classified defense reports as part of its long-year history of publishing daily informational pieces. It says here the readout unit serves as an interface with the PSV avionics so that overall you have completely integrated pilot vehicle setup. On the other hand, the control of the aircraft is specified to that set of biochemical signatures so that only the intended pilot can navigate the aircraft. The helmet integrates intimately with the brain. There is practically no time difference between the pilot's thought about locking the target and the actual lock. And the entire system reacts smoothly and timely to whatever decision the pilot takes. The vehicle must always be perceived by the pilot as an extension of his body, is the intimate communion of pilot and PSV and PSV stands for Paradigm Shifting Vehicle, so intimate that the pilot and the craft become one. So I thought that was pretty cool that we possibly already have that technology. So exactly one day after the second UAP congressional hearing, where Nancy Mace, Luna, and others called for greater transparency from the government, AARO, or the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, came out with their annual report. Seems very timely. I found this article on the dailymail.com, and it's by Ellen LaPont, who writes for the dailymail.com. And the title reads, Pentagon says UFO nearly crashed into commercial airliner above New York as bombshell report is released. The Pentagon has released a new report on UFOs that revealed hundreds of documented incidents of unidentified and unexplained aerial phenomena. It goes on to say the report comes as public interest in UAPs has skyrocketed, prompting the U.S. government to work to provide some answers about these strange objects. And this report by AARO was published one day after House lawmakers called for greater government transparency during the second UAP hearing. Then I started seeing some very encouraging posts about the new leadership at the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. I got this from the subreddit UFOs also, and it says the first indication of change of tone from AARO's new leadership. PBS reporter tweets out new AARO director Jon Kosloski describing some of recent UAP cases as true anomalies, having multiple eyewitnesses with videos exhibiting different morphologies, including orbs, cylinders, and triangles. So with the second UAP congressional hearing revealing immaculate constellation to the rest of its Congress members, and then on top of that, seeing an encouraging post about the AARO's new leadership, I started to get very excited in a positive way. I started to get hopeful. Then I saw this article about what AARO is doing in terms of searching out UAP. This is a Department of Defense article on an online newsletter called The War Zone. And the title is Military's UFO Hunting Aerial Surveillance System Detailed in Report. A Gremlin system is first being used to establish baseline data of aerial activity around a sensitive site so that anomalies can be better spotted in the future. And this is a very detailed description of what AARO is using in terms of detecting UAP. And they concentrate on UAP activity around sensitive sites like military bases and nuclear installations. This is a graphic that shows the gremlin and how it operates. And the article, I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs here. The article says the Pentagon provided new details today about how its deployable, readily reconfigurable suite of sensors called Gremlin works to help set the stage for figuring out what unidentified objects in our skies are and are not if they appear at all. In its annual report released on Thursday, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, shared a graphic that gives us our best look yet at what is the Gremlin system. And that's the graphic I just showed. It was developed by Georgia Tech Research Institute specifically to help gather data about so-called unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. That's the DoD's new parlance for what used to be called UFOs, folks. So one of AARO's missions for Gremlin is to help establish a baseline. And a baseline, as you all know, is what's normal. And Gremlin is used to help establish a baseline for what would be considered normal activity, especially because so many UAPs have been reported either through sensors near military installations or by pilots. And this is a graphic as to where the hotspots are around the world, where they're concentrating the gremlin. And it looks like the Middle East is included in this as well. And one interesting part of this article that I thought was kind of controversial for them to say, it's difficult to understand what they mean by this, but one thing AARO did not find was indications that UAPs are either extraterrestrial or from an adversary here on Earth. Okay, so if they're not from extraterrestrials or any adversary here on Earth, that begs the question, what are UAPs then? This is a look at Director Jon Kosloski, the new DoD AARO director. So I was pretty hopeful still, and I came across another post on X that seemed to confirm my positive feelings. I found this on X, and it's by Dr. Disclosure. And he says, AARO's director just signaled a shift toward full disclosure. These words will go down in history. And after 80 years of denial, derision, and ridicule of highly credible UAP reports, the US's top UFO analyst admits that not only is the government perplexed by some cases, it is also requesting public assistance in understanding them. And these are some quotes from Dr. Kosloski that confirm what Dr. Disclosure is saying. The first one is, quote, "There are interesting cases that my physics and engineering background and time in the IC or intelligence community, I do not understand, and I don't know anybody else who understands them." The second quote provided by Dr. Disclosure is, quote, "The hope is that we will be able to release as much of that content as we can to the public so that we can get help in resolving them." And that was another direct quote from Dr. Kosloski, the new director of AARO. So you can see how I was still hopeful about this new director of the Old Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. He's willing to go outside of the intelligence community, outside of Pentagon, and look for help from the public, which makes sense. There's a lot of resources out here that they're not utilizing. Okay, so now I'd like to move on and contrast the second UAP congressional hearing with the Senate landmark UAP hearing, which took place a week later, Tuesday, November the 19th. It was chaired by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And it only had one witness or one featured speaker, as opposed to the second UAP congressional hearing, which had four. So AARO Director Jon T. Kosloski refused to take an oath for his congressional testimony. That was not the case the week before during the U.S. congressional hearing, which was a lot more open and progressive in terms of really seeking out the truth. You can see here that the four panelists, including Lue Elizondo, Tim Galludet, Schellenberger, who actually exposed the Immaculate Constellation report, are all standing up. This is Michael Gold. And he's a rep from NASA. He didn't have much to say. I think he was just trying to get funding for the actual NASA itself. But you can see that they're all clearly taking an oath before giving testimony. I don't see why the director of AARO would not be required to take an oath before giving his testimony before the Senate UAP hearing. So the focus of the UAP Senate landmark hearing was supposed to be, number one, UFO drones over Langley Airport or military bases, and number two, the activities of AARO under the new director, Dr. Jon T. Kosloski. So unfortunately, according to the DoD or the Pentagon, it seems that it's never aliens. At least it hasn't been yet. The United States Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities did hear testimony on Tuesday, November the 19th, from the director, or the new director, Jon T. Kosloski. Now, the U.S. Department of Defense created the office in July of 2022, specifically in order to have a single place for military and government personnel to feel safe and to go and report UFO sightings, or UAP, as they are known now instead of UFOs. The new term, short for unidentified anomalous phenomenon, encompasses not only unidentified objects or events in the sky now, but also those in the water, in space, and those that appear to travel between those domains. And that reference is to transmedian UAPs. I guess it comes as no surprise that Dr. Kosloski reported that the majority of cases that AARO reviewed were dismissed as not being extraterrestrial, not even adversarial. So Russia, China, and ETs can be ruled out. He did comment on a few. This is one that they were unsure about, are unresolved, and are still working on. Check it out.
Was brought to us by a law enforcement officer out west, where he observed a large orange orb floating several hundred feet above the ground a couple miles away. He went to investigate what was going on with that orb. And as he was pulling up to the location where he thought would be below the orb, about 40 to 60 meters away from some object the area was well lit, he saw a blacker than black object. He said it was about the size of a Prius, 4 to 6 feet wide. And as he got 40 to 60 meters away from the object, it tilted up about 45 degrees, and then it shot up vertically. He says 10 to 100 times faster than any drone he's ever seen before. And it did that without making a sound, as far as he could tell from inside of his vehicle. And just as it left his field of view through his windshield, then it emitted very bright red and blue lights that illuminated the inside of his vehicle as brightly as if someone had set off fireworks just outside his vehicle, or street flares. So that's anomalous because of the size of the vehicle with the great acceleration. And when he came back to investigate that area, he found no disturbance of the ground beneath it.
So even though most of the cases were dismissed, including the Go Fast, believe it or not, it is encouraging that Kosloski admits openly that there are some cases that they just can't figure out. So this Senate UAP hearing stands in stark contrast to testimony presented to U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee last week, or the week before, in which a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral, Tim Galludet, and a former U.S. counterintelligence officer, Lue Elizondo, told lawmakers that the American government is part of a decades-long cover-up to conceal the fact that, quote, we are not alone in the cosmos, end quote. During Kosloski's testimony to the Senate, he gave an overview of his activities since it issued a report. He also said, quote, many of these reports are resolved as being commonplace objects like, believe it or not, birds, balloons, and unmanned systems or drones, while others lack sufficient data for comprehensive analysis. And I guess those are the few and far between that they're looking at now. Kosloski also said that, quote, only a small percentage of reports received by AARO are potentially anomalous. And I found it interesting that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand at least confronted Kosloski about the whole whistleblower issue as to whether or not whistleblowers were reticent to go to AARO and why that might be. She referred to accusations that some UAP disclosure advocates frequently level against AARO, that they are disingenuous. And the critics of AARO attest that the office is part of an alleged decades-long U.S. government-led campaign of, quote, excessive secrecy, end quote, that aims to keep the public in the dark about UFOs. And in response to Senator Gillibrand's questioning, Kosloski defended his office, saying, quote, Congress has gone out of its way to create the organization AARO specifically to conduct these sorts of investigations and has uniquely empowered them to have access to all UAP-related information, whether that's historic or current, and we take that responsibility and those authorities very seriously, he said. Finally, at the end of the hearing, AARO's report says that many cases remain unsolved and that the office continues to study them. However, AARO's ability to resolve cases, according to Kosloski, remains constrained, and I quote, remains constrained by a lack of timely and accountable sensor data. I guess that's why they set up that gremlin system. According to the report, meaning there just isn't enough data to conclusively solve cases that lack detailed or multi-sensor observations. I find that hard to believe with all the reports that have come out that they don't have enough information. In some cases, all there might be to analyze is a single photograph, a few seconds of grainy video, or an aviator's written report. Many UAP sightings happen in the blink of an eye as an unknown object zooms past a moving aircraft, for example, so there often isn't enough time to gather photographic or video evidence. In other cases, the capabilities of the sensors or platforms involved in the UAP sightings are themselves classified. Okay, I guess sometimes even their existence isn't publicly known. So AARO is unable to discuss them in unclassified reports. Okay, so I guess a lot of them go unreported because they're classified or involve classified surroundings. So in conclusion, overall, according to the 2024 AARO report, there isn't enough data for AARO to state that it has, quote, no indication or confirmation that these activities are attributable to foreign adversaries. And they also said that they're not attributable to extraterrestrial. So again, what are they attributable to? What are UAPs? And finally, the Senate UAP hearing concluded with a discussion of recent incidents in which unidentified drones or uncrewed aerial systems, UASs, were seen over military bases. Langley, for example. There were a lot of UAP or UFO drones that were flying over the base, and their anti-drone systems were not able to stop them. They were seen over military bases and other sensitive installations. Those incidents, Kosloski notes, underscore the need for the United States to have, quote, more persistent monitoring and understand that whether it is a UAP or a counter-UAS issue, that we need to have that complete domain awareness around our national security facilities. Okay, so domain awareness is very important, especially around a military base. So again, I think that the new director, Kosloski, is a bit of a disappointment and very reminiscent of his predecessor, Sean Kirkpatrick, so far, giving just a hint of hope in terms of at least giving lip service to wanting help from the public. I found some discouraging posts after the hearing from Gary Nolan, of all people. And this was actually posted by Joe Murgia. And he says that after seeing this and hearing some things, my advice to witnesses would be, do not go to AARO. And right underneath, Gary Nolan, a famous scientist who's also involved in ufology, says, I fully agree. I cannot see a reason to go to AARO. They have yet to address past issues, provide methods of analysis, etc., for any of their conclusions. That's simply not how science is done. So don't claim the mantle of science when you are not actually practicing it. Pretty blunt words from Gary Nolan. And I'd like to end by showing a video of Ryan Graves, one of the first witnesses or whistleblowers that gave testimony with David Grush at the first UAP hearing. he's giving his take on the Senate UAP hearing. And I'm showing this because he gives a more moderate, lenient approach towards what AARO is doing, as opposed to maybe my more severe assessment of AARO. Here we go.
The Senate Armed Services Committee heard testimony just a few hours ago from the Pentagon's UFO chief, Dr. Jon Kosloski. He is the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And in his testimony, he referenced several videos of UAPs his teams have been investigating, including the famous Go Fast video made public in 2017, appearing to show a UAP fly really fast and really close to the ocean's surface. His conclusion, though, no anomalous activity detected.
Through a very careful geospatial intelligence analysis using trigonometry, we assess with high confidence that the object is not actually close to the water, but is rather closer to 13,000 feet. A trick of the eye called parallax makes it look like the object is moving much faster.
Parallax. We also got eyes on a new video of a reported UAP that the Pentagon is marking as resolved. This one was taken back in 2018 while Mount Etna in Italy was erupting. You see an object appear to be flying through gas clouds and volcanic ash. But again, through video analysis and 3D modeling, the Pentagon is determining that this was a balloon drifting in the wind. Now, not all the investigations, though, are cut and dry. Over 750 plus reports of UAPs were referred to the Pentagon to look into. So far, at least 21 of them are still a mystery. Ryan Graves, co-founder of Americans for Safe Aerospace, joins us now. Ryan, thanks for being with us. Let's start real fast with your take on the old cases we heard about. Go Fast, Agua Dia, Mount Etna now. They are saying that those are case closed, according to the Pentagon. What are your thoughts on what we heard?
Well, it's nice to see that they're putting some analytical effort behind these investigations. And if they determine that they are debunked or not of interest, I think that's, a step in the right direction to better understand this phenomenon. However, I would argue that some of these cases are quote unquote debunked or no longer of interest. Specifically, the Go Fast video itself was never really interesting because it was going fast. The pilots certainly didn't say that, nor did they name the video. If anything, the Pentagon simply debunked their own naming for that video. What is interesting, what's anomalous, is that that video was captured within minutes of the gimbal video, and it just goes to further show that there were many more objects operating in that area than the first video shows.
Yeah, I mean, what we're missing here is the audio of that whole series, which is there's a whole fleet of them, and a lot of the details surrounding that incident. Do you think that everything is being taken into account here?
Well, no, I don't think everything is being taken into account. I think if the AARO office actually spoke with the pilots that were involved in that incident, they would know the objects were part of a larger formation of objects, and thus very anomalous to be operating 300 miles off the coast and within 50 miles of a U.S. aircraft carrier.
And what about the new cases? He specifically mentions the objects that are triangles and cylinders as the most difficult to investigate. I mean, it's still a lot of big question marks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are videos that are confusing, and sometimes people are led to believe it might be a UAP when perhaps it's not. Some videos might be true anomalies that are unknown, but the reports that people are bringing in that are sometimes visual and not necessarily captured by a sensor are extremely anomalous and hard to explain, and often quite vivid in their anomalous nature. And I think today they talked about a few of those, but of course, those are the hardest ones to resolve. So I expect those to remain in a category that's their active archive. That means they're not necessarily actively investigating them. They've hit a wall and have no further detail. I imagine that some of the cases in there were probably pretty hard to explain.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up sensors, too. I did want to get your thoughts on this new tool, the Gremlin, right, that's been rolled out by AARO. It's this kind of like a sensor fleet. If you can explain what the Gremlin could do here and what kind of answers it could give us.
Yeah, ultimately what we've really learned about this conversation thus far is that we have a domain awareness gap in this country, international airspace, both in the training ranges off the coast of Virginia, as well as overhead bases within the United States. Now, whether they end up being drones or whether they end up being UAP, I think it's extremely important that we close the gap. And so I commend them for the capability that they're trying to field to some of these locations. And I think the more data we have, the closer we'll get to answers in this conversation and hopefully plug this national security gap.
I think Ryan Graves, overall, he was pretty much in lockstep with the Pentagon, being a military person himself. But he did criticize AARO in terms of not investigating the pilots that actually saw the go fast and the gimbal, because there were actually a fleet of UAPs when the go fast was spotted, and they never bothered to ask the pilots about their experience or bring them in for an interview. Then they would have known that there was actually more than just one UAP, the go fast. He gave a good basic description of the Gremlin sensor fleet. Hopefully, AARO will be able to use that to their advantage. But more importantly, I think what Ryan Graves stressed was that there is a domain awareness gap right now in this country, especially over sensitive areas like military bases and nuclear sites. And hopefully, AARO will begin to address that more and more with this Gremlin sensor system. So I think there was a stark contrast between the second UAP Congressional hearing and this Senate UAP hearing on November the 19th. I think there was a lot more exposed, specifically the Immaculate Constellation report in the Congressional hearing that was held a week before on the 13th of November. On the 19th, the Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was able to ask Kosloski about critiques of them not being whistleblower friendly, which is high time that they were questioned about that. There are a lot of critics saying that whistleblowers should not go to AARO because they're not taken seriously. Also, we found out that AARO's got this new Gremlin sensor system, which hopefully will assist them in finding out what UAPs are, because after all, now they're saying that they're not ETs and they're not China or Russia. They're not our adversaries. So it'd be nice for them to find out what these UAPs are that are flying over our military bases and nuclear sites. There is a definite domain awareness gap, and hopefully that'll be addressed sooner than later. Hope I dispelled any confusion you guys might have between the Congressional UAP hearing versus the Senate UAP hearing. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My name is Al Barrows, and this has been UFO Disclosure. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my podcast.